He first sees her huddled in the corner of the chaotic intake room at Paws and Whiskers, astray herself amidst the cacophony of barking dogs and meowing cats. She's trying to make herself small, a feat for someone who, even hunched, carries an unconscious grace that speaks of ballet lessons and silk sheets, not concrete floors and donated blankets. Her clothes are smudged and torn in places, but the fabric, where it's clean, looks suspiciously expensive. It's the way she flinches when Mrs. Petrov, the shelter's booming-voiced matriarch, tries to offer her a biscuit, the slight tremor in her fine-boned hands as she accepts a bottle of water that snags Liam's attention. He's seen fear before, the wild-eyed terror of a mistreated animal, but this is different. This is the quiet, bruised fear of a hunted thing. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you believe love should feel like freedom, hit that like button and subscribe. He had no idea who she really was, this girl with eyes the color of a stormy sea and silence that wrapped around her like a protective cloak. All he knew was that she looked like she'd run a very long way, and Paws and Whiskers, for all its loving chaos, was clearly not her final destination, nor, he suspected, a place she'd ever imagined herself. And just like that, a stranger with dirt on her cheek and a story in her eyes became the most compelling mystery in his otherwise predictable life. Liam O'Connell was a man of routine and quiet comfort. His small cottage on the outskirts of Oakhaven, nestled against the whispering pines of the state forest, was his sanctuary. Each morning began with the low whistle of his old kettle and the thud of his golden retriever, Max, dropping a slobbery tennis ball by his bed. He'd inherited the cottage and Max from his grandfather, a man who understood the solace of silence and the companionship of a good dog. Liam spent his days as a part-time veterinarian, mostly doing house calls for the elderly or financially struggling residents of the county, and volunteered 3 afternoons a week at Paws and Whiskers. It was enough. It kept the loneliness at bay, the kind that had settled in after his own brief, disastrous foray into the bustling city and an even more disastrous relationship that had ended with him retreating back to the familiar embrace of Oakhaven. The shelter was his way of giving back, of finding purpose in the gentle mending of broken things, whether four-legged or, occasionally, two. He understood the language of the lost and the frightened. He saw the girl, Jane. She'd whispered her name was Jane Doe, with a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, trying to fold a rough wool blanket into a neat square, her movements precise despite her obvious exhaustion. Her dark hair, tangled and escaping a makeshift bun, gleamed with an unnatural sheen under the harsh fluorescent lights, hinting at expensive salons. The other volunteers, and even some of the more permanent, down-on-their-luck residents who helped out for a hot meal and a place to sleep, had noticed her too. Their curiosity was less gentle than Liam's. Bet she's on the run from a boyfriend, Patsy, a woman whose life was an open book of bad choices and loud opinions, declared over the clatter of food bowls. Got that look, you know? Too pretty to be on her own for long without some fella causing trouble. Brenda, older and sharper, squinted at Jane from across the room. Or maybe the trouble's her. Looks like she's used to better. Spoiled, probably. What's she doing in a place like this, eh? Their whispers, not quite hushed enough, followed Jane like annoying gnats. Liam saw her shoulders hunch a little further, her gaze dropped to the cracked linoleum. He felt a familiar pang of protectiveness, the same he felt for a nervous kitten cowering in the back of its cage. A discarded local newspaper lay on the break room table, days old. Liam glanced at it idly while sipping his lukewarm coffee. A small, blurry photo on page 3 caught his eye, a smiling young woman at a charity gala, diamonds winking at her throat. The caption read, "Socialite Annalise Vanderbilt still missing. Family pleads for information." He frowned. There was a fleeting, almost imperceptible resemblance to the quiet girl in the corner, something in the set of the jaw, the high cheekbones. But the woman in the photo was polished, confident, worlds away from their Jane Doe. He dismissed it. Rich girls didn't end up in places like Paws and Whiskers, not usually. The days settled into a new rhythm. Jane, as she continued to be called, found small ways to make herself useful. She had an uncanny ability with the traumatized animals, a quiet patience that coaxed even the most fearful dog to take a treat from her hand. She'd sit for hours in the cattery, murmuring softly to the feral kittens, her presence a calming balm. She never spoke of her past, deflecting gentle inquiries with a shy smile or a sudden interest in a nearby chore. Liam watched her, intrigued. He saw the shadows that sometimes crossed her face when she thought no one was looking, the way she'd jump if someone entered a room too suddenly. He saw her hands, surprisingly soft despite the rough work, clench when a siren wailed in the distance. She was beginning to feel a fragile sense of safety, he could tell. She even smiled, a genuine, breathtaking smile, when a litter of puppies tumbled over her feet. That smile made his chest ache in a way he hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, Liam found her struggling to soothe a new arrival, a terrified German Shepherd mix that cowered and snarled at anyone who approached. The dog, a stray found near the highway, was matted and thin, its eyes wide with panic. Jane was speaking to it in low, soothing tones, her hand outstretched, palm up, in a gesture of non-aggression. "Easy there, big fella," Liam said softly, approaching slowly. "He's had a rough time." Jane looked up, her brow furrowed with concern. "He won't let me near him. I think he's hurt." "Let's try together," Liam suggested. They worked in tandem, Liam's calm expertise and Jane's intuitive gentleness. He showed her how to read the dog's subtle cues, the flick of an ear, the tightening of a muscle. Slowly, painstakingly, the shepherd began to relax. Finally, it nudged its head against Jane's offered hand, a low whine escaping its throat. Jane let out a shaky breath, her eyes luminous. "Oh, you poor thing." She looked at Liam, a shared sense of relief passing between them. "Thank you. You did most of the work," he said, his voice a little rough. "You have a gift with them." She blushed, a faint color rising in her pale cheeks. "They're honest. You always know where you stand with an animal." The statement hung in the air, loaded with unspoken meaning. He remembered the newspaper photo again, the forced smile of the socialite. This girl, this Jane, seemed more at home with the broken and the lost than with glittering chandeliers. Later that week, during a lull, Liam found Jane meticulously mending a tear in one of the shelter's threadbare blankets with a needle and thread she'd somehow procured. The stitches were tiny, almost invisible. "Where'd you learn to sew like that?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe of the small supply closet she'd claimed as her mending station. She jumped, startled, then offered a small, apologetic smile. "Oh, my grandmother taught me. A long time ago." Her fingers stilled on the fabric. She said it was important to know how to fix things, not just replace them. "A wise woman," Liam commented, watching the delicate movement of her hands. He noticed a faint, almost healed scratch on her wrist, peeking from beneath the cuff of her oversized, donated sweater. It looked like it could have come from a thorny rosebush, or perhaps a desperate scramble through undergrowth. He offered her a chocolate bar he'd been saving. "Peace offering. For startling you." She took it, her fingers brushing his. A tiny spark, unexpected and surprisingly potent, jumped between them. Her eyes met his, wide and questioning for a moment, before she looked down, a shy smile playing on her lips. "Thank you, Liam." It was the first time she'd used his name without him prompting. It felt significant. That evening, as he drove home, Max panting contentedly in the passenger seat, Liam couldn't shake the image of her small, capable hands, or the vulnerability in her stormy eyes. He was becoming entirely too invested in the mystery of Jane Doe. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that she was running from something, or someone, significant. And he knew, with an even deeper certainty, that he wanted to be the place she could finally stop running. The next few weeks passed in a quiet rhythm of shared tasks and unspoken understanding. Jane slowly began to emerge from her shell, at least with Liam. They fell into an easy companionship, cleaning kennels, walking dogs, and sharing lukewarm coffee during breaks. He learned that she liked her tea with a splash of milk and 2 sugars, that she hummed off-key when she was concentrating, and that she had an encyclopedic knowledge of wildflowers. She learned that Liam had a dry wit that surfaced at unexpected moments, that he was unfailingly kind, even to Patsy and Brenda who still eyed her with suspicion, and that he missed his grandfather fiercely. Patsy, in particular, seemed to take Jane's quietness as a personal affront, or perhaps an indication of snobbery. "Still not talking much, is she, princess?" she'd say loudly whenever Jane was within earshot, wiping down a counter with aggressive swipes. "Too good for us common folk, I suppose." Jane would just shrink a little, her gaze falling, and Liam would usually intervene with a distraction or a gentle redirection. "Patsy, have you seen the new bag of kitty litter? I can't find it anywhere." One afternoon, they were in the small, sun-dappled yard behind the shelter, attempting to teach a clumsy beagle puppy named Bagel not to eat his own leash. Bagel, naturally, was having none of it, yipping with delight as he tangled himself, Jane, and Liam in a hopeless knot. Jane was laughing, a genuine, unrestrained sound that made Liam's heart do a strange flip. Her hair had come loose from its usual severe bun and cascaded around her shoulders, catching the sunlight. For a moment, she looked carefree, young, and breathtakingly beautiful. "He's a menace," she gasped, trying to pry the leash from Bagel's determined jaws. "He just wants to be close to you," Liam said, his voice softer than he intended. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the puppy, and this time, neither of them pulled away immediately. The air crackled with a sudden, unexpected tension. Jane's laughter died in her throat, her eyes locking with his. The world seemed to shrink to the space between them, filled with the scent of dry grass, puppy breath, and something else, something new and fragile and utterly terrifying. Then Patsy's voice cut through the moment like a rusty saw. Well, getting cozy, are we? Some people have all the luck. Show up looking like a drowned rat and still got the vet wrapped around her little finger." Jane flinched as if struck. The light in her eyes died, replaced by a familiar haunted look. She scrambled to her feet, disentangling herself from the leash and Liam. I should go check on the kittens," she stammered, her face pale, and fled back inside the shelter. Liam glared at Patsy. That was unnecessary. Patsy just shrugged, a smug look on her face. Just saying what everyone's thinking. She's not one of us. Acts all high and mighty with her quiet act. The casual cruelty of it stung Liam, mostly because he knew how deeply it would wound Jane. He found her later, in the cattery, her back to the door, ostensibly stroking a purring tabby, but he could see the slight tremor in her shoulders. He didn't say anything, just sat down quietly beside her. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "They're right, you know." "About what?" Liam asked gently. "I don't belong here." Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I'm different." "Different isn't bad, Jane." She turned to him then, her eyes filled with a desperate sadness that tore at him. "You don't understand. It's not just different. It's complicated. Dangerous." Before he could respond, Mrs. Petrov bustled in. "Liam, there's a gentleman at the front desk asking for you. Says it's important. Something about a donation." Liam hesitated, looking at Jane's troubled face. "I'll be right back," he promised. The gentleman was a man in a sharply tailored suit that probably cost more than Liam's monthly mortgage payment. He was polite, but his eyes were cold, assessing. He wasn't interested in making a donation. He was asking questions. Vague questions at first, about the shelter's intake process, about any recent arrivals who seemed out of place. "We get all sorts here," Liam said, keeping his tone neutral. "People fall on hard times." "Indeed," the man said, his gaze sweeping the chaotic reception area. "We are looking for a young woman. Dark hair, blue eyes, about 5'6". She might be disoriented, vulnerable." He produced a discreetly folded photograph from his inner pocket. It was Annalise Vanderbilt, the same girl from the newspaper, but this photo was clearer, more recent. The resemblance to Jane was undeniable, startling. Liam's blood ran cold. He kept his face impassive. "Doesn't ring a bell. We have a lot of dark-haired, blue-eyed women pass through. It's a common enough description." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, if you do happen to see anyone matching that description, her family is very concerned. There's a substantial reward for information leading to her safe return." He handed Liam a card with a name, Arthur Grimshaw, ESQ, and a private phone number. Liam pocketed the card. "I'll keep an eye out." As soon as Grimshaw left, Liam felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He found Jane where he'd left her, in the cattery. She looked up as he entered, her eyes wide and questioning. "That man," she began, her voice trembling. "He was looking for you, wasn't he?" Liam stated, his voice gentle but firm. Tears welled in Jane's eyes. She nodded, a single, miserable movement. "My name, it's not Jane. It's Annalise. Annalise Vanderbilt." The name hung in the air, heavy with implications of wealth, privilege, and a life so far removed from the dusty floors of paws and whiskers it was almost comical. "Vanderbilt," Liam repeated softly, the pieces clicking into place. The expensive-looking clothes, the refined accent she tried to hide, the way she flinched at loud noises, the constant air of looking over her shoulder. "They want me to marry a man I despise," she whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "My father, it's a business arrangement. He's controlling. I couldn't do it, Liam. I just ran. I took some cash, a few things, and I just ran until I couldn't run anymore." She looked at him, her face a mask of fear and shame. "You must think I'm pathetic. A spoiled rich girl playing at being poor." Liam moved closer, sitting beside her on the worn wooden bench. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a solid comfort. "I think you're brave," he said quietly. "It takes courage to walk away from everything you know, especially when everyone expects you to stay." Her shoulders sagged with relief. "He'll find me. Grimshaw. He's my father's lawyer, his fixer. He always finds me." A shudder ran through her. "I can't go back. Not to that." "Then you don't," Liam said, a fierce protectiveness rising in him. "We'll figure something out." But even as he said it, a sense of foreboding settled over him. Oakhaven was a small town. Paws and Whiskers was a public place. How long could Annalise Vanderbilt, the missing heiress, truly hide? A few days later, the fragile peace they had built shattered. Liam was helping Annalise. He still thought of her as Jane in his head, feed the new litter of kittens, their earlier tension replaced by a quiet camaraderie born of her confession, when Patsy burst into the cattery. Her face flushed with excitement and a touch of malice. "You are not going to believe this," she announced, her voice ringing with triumph. "There's a whole parade of fancy black cars pulling up outside. Looks like someone important has come to visit our little shelter." Annalise froze, the kitten she was holding cradled against her chest. The color drained from her face, leaving her ghostly pale. Her eyes, wide with terror, met Liam's. "They found me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Liam's heart sank. He'd known, intellectually, that this moment was inevitable, but he hadn't been prepared for the sheer, visceral panic that gripped Annalise, or the sudden, overwhelming urge he felt to shield her, to somehow make the black cars and everything they represented disappear. He put a reassuring hand on her arm, though his own was trembling slightly. "Stay here. I'll go see what's happening." But it was too late. The door to the cattery swung open, and Arthur Grimshaw stood framed in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Liam could see several large, imposing men in dark suits fanning out into the main shelter area, their presence instantly transforming the familiar, chaotic space into something tense and alien. The playful yips of puppies and the welcoming meows of cats were silenced, replaced by an unnerving quiet. The other volunteers and the few stray humans who frequented the shelter stared, mouths agape, at the sudden invasion of wealth and power. Grimshaw's gaze landed on Annalise, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Annalise, dear, your father has been extraordinarily worried. It's time to come home." His voice was calm, reasonable, but it held the unyielding weight of an ultimatum. Annalise clutched the kitten tighter, her knuckles white. She looked small and terribly vulnerable against the backdrop of rough-hewn cages. "I'm not going with you," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, though Liam could feel the tremors running through her. Grimshaw's smile didn't falter. "Now, Annalise, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. You've had your adventure, but your responsibilities await." He took a step into the cattery. Liam instinctively moved to stand slightly in front of Annalise, a silent barrier. "She said she's not going," Liam stated, his voice low and firm. Grimshaw's eyes flicked to Liam, dismissing him as an irrelevance. "This is a family matter, Mr. O'Connell," Liam supplied. "And it seems to me Annalise is old enough to make her own decisions." A flicker of annoyance crossed Grimshaw's face. "Miss Vanderbilt is overwrought. She's not thinking clearly." He addressed Annalise again, his tone softening, a practice maneuver. "Your father is prepared to forgive this lapse in judgment. He simply wants you home, safe. Your fiancé, Edward, is also very concerned." At the mention of her fiancé, Annalise visibly recoiled. "Edward doesn't care about me. He cares about the Vanderbilt name and my father's money." "That's hardly fair, Annalise," Grimshaw chided gently. "He's a very suitable match." The air in the small cattery was thick with tension. The kitten in Annalise's arms let out a small mew, a tiny protest in the face of the overwhelming adult drama. Outside, Liam could hear the hushed, awed whispers of the other shelter occupants. Patsy and Brenda were undoubtedly having the gossip highlight of their year. Annalise looked at Liam, her eyes filled with a desperate appeal. He saw the fear, but beneath it, a spark of defiance he hadn't seen before. The last few weeks, the quiet anonymity, the simple kindnesses, they had changed her, strengthened her in subtle ways. "I'm not a piece of property to be traded, Mr. Grimshaw," Annalise said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm not going back to that life. I won't marry Edward." Grimshaw sighed, a theatrical display of patience wearing thin. "Annalise, your father is not a man to be trifled with. He has instructed me to bring you home." voluntarily or otherwise. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. The men outside were not just drivers. They were muscle, there to ensure compliance. Liam felt a surge of anger. You can't force her to do anything. Can't I? Grimshaw raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Mr. O'Connell, you are a veterinarian in a small town. I am a lawyer with considerable resources at my disposal. I suggest you allow Miss Vanderbilt to speak for herself without your unhelpful interference. The confrontation was escalating, moving towards a point of no return. Liam knew he was outmatched in terms of power and influence, but he also knew he couldn't stand by and let them drag Annalise away if she truly didn't want to go. He looked at Annalise. This was her fight, ultimately. He could support her, stand with her, but the decision had to be hers. What do you want to do, Annalise? He asked softly, his gaze holding hers. She took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving his. For a moment, all the fear, all the uncertainty, seemed to recede, replaced by a quiet resolve. She gently placed the kitten back into its bed of soft blankets, its tiny siblings mewling around it. Then she straightened up, her shoulders back, no longer the hunched, frightened girl who had first arrived at Paws and Whiskers. She turned to face Arthur Grimshaw, the full force of her Vanderbilt lineage suddenly apparent in her bearing, but tempered now with a newfound strength that was entirely her own. The confrontation unfolded not with shouts, but with the quiet, steely tension of wills clashing. The shelter's main room had become an impromptu arena. Mrs. Petrov stood near the reception desk, her arms crossed, her usual booming demeanor subdued by a worried frown. Patsy and Brenda, along with a few other volunteers and stragglers, watched from the periphery, their earlier mockery forgotten, replaced by a stunned, almost fearful curiosity. The fleet of black cars gleamed ominously through the front windows, a stark reminder of the world Annalise had fled. Mr. Grimshaw, Annalise began, her voice clear and surprisingly resonant in the sudden hush. I appreciate my father's concern, however, misguided. She chose her words carefully, the polish of her upbringing evident. But I will not be returning with you today. Grimshaw's composure remained impeccable, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. Annalise, be reasonable. This display of rebellion is pointless. What do you imagine you will achieve by staying in this place? His gaze swept dismissively around the humble shelter. Peace, perhaps, Annalise countered, a hint of defiance in her tone. A chance to breathe. A chance to be someone other than a pawn in my father's business dealings. Liam stood beside her, a silent sentinel. He didn't speak, but his presence was a steadfast anchor. He could feel the tremor in her hand as it brushed his, ever so slightly, and he resisted the urge to take it, knowing this moment was hers. Your father provides you with everything, Annalise, Grimshaw pressed, his voice hardening. A life of comfort, of privilege. A gilded cage is still a cage, Mr. Grimshaw, Annalise interjected, her voice rising slightly. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. I was suffocating. Don't you understand? I couldn't. I can't live like that anymore. Her gaze flickered to Liam for a fleeting second, a silent acknowledgement of the sanctuary she'd found, however temporary, however humble. In his eyes, she saw not pity, but a quiet understanding that bolstered her resolve. This is highly irregular, Annalise, Grimshaw said, his patience clearly fraying. He gestured subtly to the two large men who had moved to flank the cattery doorway. We can do this the easy way, or the difficult way. But you are coming with us. Annalise visibly tensed. The threat was no longer veiled. Liam stepped forward slightly. She's made her wishes clear, Mr. Grimshaw. And this is private property. Unless you have a court order stating otherwise, you and your men are trespassing. Grimshaw shot Liam a look of pure venom. You would do well to stay out of matters that do not concern you, Mr. O'Connell. You have no idea the forces you are attempting to interfere with. Perhaps, Liam said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. But I do know what's right. And forcing a terrified young woman to return to a life she despises, isn't it? A tense silence descended. The only sounds were the distant bark of a dog and the heavy breathing of one of Grimshaw's men. Annalise looked from Grimshaw's implacable face to Liam's steady one. The choice was stark, the opulent prison of her past, or the terrifying uncertainty of a future she would have to build for herself, perhaps here, in this unlikely place, with this unlikely man. She took a shaky breath. I am not going back, she said, her voice trembling but firm. You can tell my father. Tell him I will contact him when I am ready. But I will not be forced. Not anymore. She looked directly at Grimshaw, her chin high. "And if you attempt to remove me from here against my will, I will make such a scene that even your considerable resources will struggle to contain the fallout. The press, Mr. Grimshaw. They do so love a story about a distressed heiress." It was a gamble, a desperate play, but the mention of the press, of public scandal, seemed to give Grimshaw pause. His eyes narrowed. He knew she wasn't bluffing, not entirely. The Vanderbilt name was powerful, but also vulnerable to unwanted scrutiny. He stared at Annalise for a long, calculating moment. Then, with a curt nod, he seemed to deflate slightly. "Very well, Annalise. For now." His tone was icy. "But do not imagine this is over. Your father will not be pleased." He turned to Liam. "And you, Mr. O'Connell. You may live to regret this day." With that, he turned on his heel and strode out of the shelter, his men falling into formation behind him. The slam of car doors echoed through the suddenly quiet room. One by one, the engines of the black cars purred to life, and then, with a whisper of expensive tires on asphalt, they were gone. A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the shelter. Annalise swayed on her feet, the adrenaline that had sustained her suddenly draining away. Liam reached out and steadying her, his hand closing firmly around her arm. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "They're gone. You're safe." She leaned against him, a shuddering breath escaping her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, her face buried against his shoulder. "Oh, Liam, thank you." He held her for a moment, the scent of her hair, a faint, lingering trace of expensive perfume mixed with the honest smell of soap and animals, filling his senses. He felt the fragility of her, the immense courage it had taken for her to stand her ground. The mockers, Patsy and Brenda, were silent, their expressions a mixture of awe and belated respect. Even Mrs. Petrov looked impressed, a small, approving nod directed at Annalise. Slowly, Annalise pulled back, though her hand remained in his. Her eyes, still bright with unshed tears, searched his face. What now?" Liam squeezed her hand. "Now," he said, a small smile touching his lips, "I think we could both use a cup of coffee. Probably still terrible, but familiar." A watery chuckle escaped her. "Okay. Coffee sounds good." They walked out of the cattery, past the stunned onlookers, and into the small, cluttered break room. The discarded newspaper with Annalise's photo still lay on the table. She picked it up, looked at the smiling, trapped girl in the picture for a long moment, then slowly tore it in half, and then in half again, letting the pieces fall into the bin. Liam poured 2 mugs of the shelter's notoriously bad coffee. He handed one to Annalise. Their fingers brushed, and this time, the spark was warm, comforting, a silent promise of new beginnings. She took a sip, grimaced playfully. "Still terrible. Some things never change," Liam agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "And some things do," Annalise said softly, her gaze meeting his over the rim of her mug. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a tentative hope, and something else, something that made Liam's heart beat a little faster. The road ahead was uncertain. Her father would not give up easily. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, surrounded by the comforting chaos of paws and whiskers, Annalise Vanderbilt, formerly Jane Doe, felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time, a flicker of freedom in the quiet, steady presence of a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and hadn't turned away. It was, she thought, a very good place to start. Thanks for watching. If you believe in second chances and real love, give this story a like and subscribe for more.